I don't know any place.
Oh, here comes.
Okay.
Here she comes.
Okay.
Hello. It's August 24th for the Regional Plan Commission. We're going to start out with a roll call, please. Or should I do that, Renee? Call
I got
names.
it. Vern Sisson. Patricia Grant.
Here.
Charles Eldridge.
Here.
Ellie Fleming here. Garrett Anderson. Perry Moy.
Here.
Michelle Thimios.
Here.
Taylor Johnson. Randall Zaleski. Nancy Glissman.
Here.
Carolyn Campbell. Adam Wallen. Melissa Adamson. Scott Hennings. Jim McConaughey. And Shaylin Daigle.
It appears that all of our ex officios are absent this evening, which is fine, because now we can concentrate on what we need to do. So, let's go with approval of the draft minutes. Has everybody read them? Do they have any changes that you'd want to make to them? No? Okay. Then would somebody make an,
I move acceptance of the minutes.
Second.
and carry. Next is approval of the agenda. The way it stands, I want to add one other thing to that. Never mind, I'm going to take care of it during the chairman's comments. So approval of the agenda or any
So
changes
moved.
thereof?
And second.
Okay, then it's time for my comments. The first thing I'd like to do is introduce you all to Vern Sisson. He's our new member. He will be with us as we dive through all of this information. Be ready. Be ready. Be very ready. The other thing I want to do is tell everybody here, because you were all here at some point, except for with the county fair. Perry, you were not at our area except for a visit, and you pushed your pin so you know what's going on.
Right.
You brought all the information to show all the people who didn't come. So there you go. To let you know, the reason we did the pins for where you live is so that we could find out how many families came through. We did the butterfly packets of the perennials, so we know how many people we were giving them to. And we know how many people used the chickpeas as part of our plan. The kids mostly for the chickpeas, but if the kids came in, they came in with the family. We wanted everything to be very interactive because the fair didn't want anybody in the alleyways to go through. There are too many people with ginormous kids, not cradles, strollers. You could tent out overnight. They were amazing. So much has changed since I had children. But we did have at least 394 people, families, come through over 6 days. We had 525 packets that went out, and from what we heard from Trish, there were at least 30. Renee, didn't you tell me she said 30 that came over from that week, the first week in August?
Yeah. Responses to the survey, yes.
Responses to the
Around
survey?
there.
And how many do we have from the second week? Because I did a presentation to the Rotary, and if nothing came through, Garrett, it's all your fault. It's okay. I'm kidding. But we also, for the land use part with the kids and the chickpeas, we had 197 or not 198 people come through because we had 787 responses.
Super.
I think I might have missed one.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is the highest number of chickpeas were for ag crop production. Certainly, next is open space. Every kid wanted as much open space recreation as they could get, so they put all of their 4 pins in. Then after that, it was ag tourism. It was greenway for private for private, come on, a private open space. 12 was the number for industrial warehousing, 9 for commercial office. But there were 39 people for commercial retail, and between multifamily homes and single-family homes, there were just about 105 people who said that that was the most important thing that they thought needed to be done as we move for the future. And you could tell who was saying what, because if you look at you can't see it, you have to touch it. On the back, you can see where everybody was from and what they were talking about. So it was a very good turnout, and I think the number of responses shows that it's interesting enough to continue it in some form.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe by next year, we can have the same kind of booth that says, finished, or congratulations, or here we go.
Mission accomplished.
There you go. No, that's 911. No, we don't. That's okay. But there's something that we can do with that still, and make sure we still have outreach. I know that some of the people at the Rotary were concerned about water levels. And so we have the Sarah maps that we showed them. If you can't see the map up there, we do have the 2030 plan map. We have the FEMA floodplain, the historic flood zones, green infrastructure areas, and aided wetland maps. We had all of those out for people so that we could explain, once you have your zoning, now we have to figure out, put that on top of it and see where we can actually do anything we can do. That's my assumption. Am I wrong? I think I'm
Well, I
okay with
mean,
that.
ideally, we're creating a plan
Based on,
and then zoning gets
Afterwards.
updated, yeah. But
correct. So once we get through, Vern, with this, then we start getting further in with, by thinking off the top of my head. Hopefully, we'll have all of this done by December, maybe a little bit after, but after that, it goes to PE&D for them to review it, then it goes to the county board to review it and approve it. They may make changes, they may do whatever they want to do. We're hoping to give them the best possible maps that we can work with, that everybody can work with. It's not just something off the top of their head or the usual stuff, and we rely on Brandon and his people to give us that information. Hopefully, the whole thing will be done by March, and then the hard work starts, because now you have to make your zoning and what we decide to do work with what we decide to do and what there is, and how can we accomplish the things that we've talked about to do in those areas. So that's my, I have a minute left. Never mind, you can start. Thank you, Brandon.
thank you.
Oh, and if there's any public comment, I don't think there is today, and no old business, and then we're into new business, unless somebody has some old business to work with. I'm going to be very quiet tonight. Go
All
ahead.
right, thank
Yay.
you.
Oh, I'm sorry, you'll have to introduce everybody over again.
Sure, yeah. So, Brandon Nolan, good to see you all again. Practice lead with House Levine. Also had Trisha Parks and Sue John Stressa with House Levine as well. Sue John is kind of my go-to for helping out with a lot of this GIS work, and so he and I are going to be working really closely over the next couple months to kind of refine what you guys are seeing today. And Trisha is going to helping manage the project and really helping oversee some of the policy chapter of content delivery. Yeah, we'll dive in here, and then again, basically have a slide deck to go over the memo we sent you yesterday, and really just kind of want to orient you to it and see if you have questions tonight, and happy to answer questions later as well. You're welcome. And say welcome aboard, Vern. Thank you. So again, just want to provide an update on the planning process, dive into scenarios, and talk about next steps. So we're basically, in the home stretch, and from a land use perspective, we have a couple different scenarios we're going over tonight. Ideally, we're getting feedback from you all tonight and over the next couple of weeks, and any hard copy comments or email comments, and then we can use the next couple months to refine things as we do some additional engagement with townships and municipalities, as we are pulling together the policy chapters and making sure everything dovetails. So, reminder of the last meeting. This is the quote-unquote business as usual scenario, and so this was taking existing municipal plan documents, digitizing those, and getting them into a map. Basically taking all the land use designations from all those different plans, agreeing on kind of a universal kind of map legend for them, and applying them. And so what we found in doing that exercise is if we were to let municipal kind of policy just move forward unchanged, we would be losing about 41,000 acres worth of ag, and that ag would be developed mostly for single-family residential, low density and estate residential. About 3,500 acres would be for medium or higher density, so 4 units and up per acre, and then about 1,600 acres of commercial and 1,200 acres of industrial. So that's the map. Again, this is just a quick summary of what we went over last time. And so really what that does is it overshoots pretty extensively what's being forecasted for the county in terms of growth. We're looking at just over 27,000 new households per CMAP coming to the region by 2050. So that's kind of the mark we're looking at to see, does the model the map that we're putting out there kind of pass muster? And in this case, it was more than double, quadruple, I think, right? So a lot of acreage being developed or shown as developed in this map that we want to kind of pull the reins back on per our discussion last time. And then a reminder, some of the areas we kind of dove into in more discussion. Upper left is Marengo. They are very aggressive in their land use plan from a few years back. And as you know, they've been pretty aggressive in annexation because of the new interchange, which is understandable. It's a unique kind of economic asset that's come on since their last plan. Huntley is shown in the upper right here. They basically have a large growth area in their northwest that isn't influenced by other surrounding municipalities. And then lower left, Crystal Lake. That looks a bit more exaggerated in terms of growth potential than it really is because of a lot of estate residential that's already in place in those areas. And then Spring Grove area, so kind of the northeast corner of the county, a lot of kind of infill potential in some areas that we discussed. So any questions about the last round before we dive into kind of the new findings? Just want to make sure everyone remembers what we talked about. So tonight we want to focus on those new scenarios. One we're calling kind of a step-down approach. So what we did is, and I'll get into this in more detail, but in a nutshell, we further refined what we consider kind of areas in play, areas that could accommodate growth and change moving forward based on where we have priorities for agricultural conservation, for floodplains, wetland conservation, and we also want to recognize the potential impacts of the sensitive aquifer recharge areas on the development potential. So with the overlay in place, if you have development within that overlay, you have to practice conservation design for the most part. So that means kind of looking at development a little bit differently. It doesn't mean you can't develop those areas, but it means it needs to be shifted around to make sure that development isn't impacting those aquifer recharge areas and really kind of pull back on the density. And then the second scenario, or scenario 3 that we're talking about tonight, takes a harder look at some of the projections for individual municipalities. So CMAP provides projections for the county as a whole as well as individual municipalities. And so we use those as a way of gauging how much growth we need to look at surrounding each municipality, and then made some kind of map customizations and modifications using just kind of our own context and knowledge of the area to start taking more of a more refined approach of things. So scenario 3 is the least kind of systematic of the 3 we'll be talking about. It's got more kind of judgment calls that we've been making, and those are some of the areas we want to highlight tonight in our discussion.
Brandon, where does CMAP come up with their numbers?
It's a great question. So if it's like the 2040 process, part of it has to do with municipal zoning and development potential. So they look at what's existing capacity, basically. So what development could happen within existing municipal limits. They also do a round of engagement with municipal planners to say, hey, based on your current plan or based on this or that, is this the growth you're anticipating? And so they have those conversations, and then they also look at broader trends in the region. And so they know the Chicago region as a whole is growing by X amount, what share makes sense to happen in McHenry County. And so it's kind of a regional projection meets local expectations, and they meet in the middle. At least that's the 2040 numbers. I don't have the white paper on the 2050 in front of me, but I think it was a similar process. Yeah.
Is most of the loss of the ag down around Prineville, Huntley area? Is that primarily where that's?
Yeah, so you're seeing all that yellow on the map. Basically, any large swaths of that light yellow on the map are new, 2 to 4 acre residential developments. And again, that's per their existing municipal plans. So,
But that's all municipal, and we don't have any, necessarily have any control over
Right.
that.
So within Illinois, municipalities are allowed to plan for within 1.5 miles of their boundaries, as long as it doesn't overlay with another municipality, or if they might have boundary agreements in place. So, Huntley might have agreements in place with Lake in the Hills about you can only go north of this line, you can only go south of this line. So, but yeah, again, this plan is going to have to recognize the municipal
Right.
jurisdictions and kind of their rights for development. And I think where we've landed is we still want to provide a bigger picture vision for the region of what we want to achieve overall, but also recognize that a lot of that's going to happen. A lot of the change has to happen on the municipal side. So it's a balancing act there. Which is why I think as we get into the next round, we want to do another round of engagement with municipal planners and townships to make sure they're, what they're seeing is somewhat in line with what they're thinking. So, to kind of set the table for scenario 2, one of the things we wanted to do was come back to the land use framework and really make sure basically the parcels we thought could accommodate development was accurate. So, in looking at the land use framework, which is small in this graphic, I'll enlarge in a second, we were basically looking at, all right, where are there floodplains, wetlands, where is extensive agriculture, where we've got highly productive ag land that's got contiguous acreage, where is the SARA overlay and all this. And so we did that, we used these layers in this land use framework to basically help us isolate what are those parcels that could accommodate some kind of development. And so if we remove those other areas from consideration, we end up with this map here. So basically, the orange parcels on this map, which is page 3 of your memo, are basically all the parcels that aren't impacted by wetlands, aren't impacted by floodplain, or aren't substantially impacted by those areas, I should say. So it kind of further refined development kind of potential within the area. So when we look at those municipal land use plans, we're taking some parcels out of the mix that really probably shouldn't be developed because of X, Y, or Z. So this is that new filter we were basically going to apply those municipal land use plans to, rather than looking at everything as equal and being treated as such. The other piece we wanted to make sure we were accommodating was that forecast growth. So overall, McHenry County is projected to grow by 67,525 households through 2050. And not quite half or a third of that is going to be unincorporated McHenry County, so about 27,000 households. So we wanted to keep these numbers in mind as we were looking at really how much growth do we need to accommodate. And we're focusing on housing first, because we really want to make sure if we can get the group to agree on that residential pattern, then we can make good decisions about where commercial should be, where industrial should be. Trying to talk about where commercial should be located without talking about rooftops is hard. And so this is a map, and this is, again, on page 5 of your memo, if you want to see the larger version. But basically, the darker the blue the cell, the more growth is projected to happen in that area. So you can see on this map, not surprisingly, a lot of those darker blue areas are happening within existing municipal areas. So the areas surrounding Central Woodstock, the 47 corridor in Huntley, the Crystal Lake Cary area north of 14, and then other parts of the 31 corridor, parts of Harvard. We wanted to keep kind of not just the overall number, but kind of where growth is projected to occur in mind as we're talking about these land use decisions.
I have a quick question. When the 2030 plan came out originally, it had a pretty significant deviation from what the population estimate was and household estimate was versus what the reality was. Is CMAP what we used for the 2030 as well?
I don't know the answer to that. I think I don't know. It's been 10 years. I can look. We could answer that question. I just don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to look at the source of that, because I know it's got a chart that shows it. I don't.
And I know
the
that we
source.
can like view the future, but
Yeah.
I'm just thinking if it was such a huge deviation
Yeah.
from what came to be, maybe
So-
we need to look at multiple sources.
Well, I guess to that point, the 2040 projections from CMAP became a little bit notorious for being overly
Okay.
kind
They
of.
went the other way?
Yeah, it was like actually, oh, no, it was saying you're gonna grow by leaps and bounds.
Okay.
And then the recession hit and a lot of that growth didn't happen, so,
So is it much
that's why
higher?
as we get in, what's
They
that?
projected it was going to be much higher, and we basically said.
Brandon,
Yeah,
I can respond a little bit. I was chairman of that plan commission. And as I recall, there was a good deal of controversy about what the projection should be. We started on that discussion, I think, in 2007. And at that time, we were still growing great guns. And there was a considerable question. I think we did use information from CMAP, but there was discussion within CMAP at that point, as well as in our commission, as to what the heck was going to happen in the ensuing years. And frankly, from 2010 through 2016 or so, was below everybody's estimate of, basically it was close to zero growth for that period, which I don't think anybody predicted when we were doing the population growth. On the other hand, I think that having said that, I think where we came down was we're probably not going to grow nearly this much, but sooner or later we will. And if it turns out to be 100 years, we've planned for 100 years and not for 20 years. That was the justification for the growth being as large as the planning for growth being as large as it was.
and I think, I guess to piggyback on that, I would like to view this plan similarly in that we want to provide kind of rules for growth and change, regardless of when it happens. Like, once it does come to a certain area, you know what to expect to some degree, because we still have to make decisions about what areas we want to preserve for ag. And if we're too conservative, this plan ends up being irrelevant 5 years from now.
Yeah.
If we're overzealous, it means nothing because you're not guiding anything. So we're going to have that discussion. And I guess where I want to get to it, and you'll see this in the final comments I have at the end of the slide deck. I think starting with scenario 3, which is the most conservative 3, and then maybe adding a little bit to that makes the most sense, because we know we're starting kind of with a scenario that is at least in line with CMAP, which we think is over aggressive anyway. So that way, if we do add to it, it's a bit more of a safe bet without still kind of overshooting. So, and again, I want to make sure we talk about that later too. But do you want?
Okay, I've got something to bring up. Charlie and I had talked about the importance of the cash crop of hay. And I'm going to tell you something, this past week and the week before, as everybody has been cutting their hay, this is haying time in case anybody's wondering. There have been so many instances of people hauling hay and having a train of cars behind them honking at them, and that's got to stop. There is a problem right there with the fight between city slickers and farmers and the hay situation. And don't forget that affects every one of the horse barns that are very valuable and are bringing in a lot of money into this county. And there are a lot of people who have their horses here that used to be in other counties, as we've discussed extensively here. And then the other thing is, I don't know if you're aware of this, but over the last couple of weeks, there have been, there's a yellow scum in the water, and there's also particulate in the water.
Which water? What water?
But
Where?
in the Bull Valley Creek area.
Okay.
So that's, my question is, so where are they gonna get this water? For all these people that they're talking about. I really think everybody, all these cities are going to have to go back into their own selves, into their blasted out interiors that are falling apart and the asphalt's all over the place and whatnot. Go back and redevelop what they've got, like on Route 14, which is a mess, and all of these other areas, and go back and check and see what they've got going on that they can reuse instead of going out into farmlands and into our cash crop lands, which, don't forget, I bring this up again, is hay. And so that's something that has to be, I don't know, it's got to be drummed into people's heads. And when you see farmers going along the road slowly hauling huge tons of hay, I know, I do it myself, we can't stop. You're going to get run over bad in situations. So I don't know, I think it's almost a public safety thing, you know, but
So,
And we're going to get down to that, because I think in one of these scenarios, we get right to the very end, we lose very little ag land
yeah. and
to
that's-
start out with in the scenarios. So that's protecting the ag land. Then we get down to, once we've got that done and figured out how much and how close we have to have things to municipalities, so that we can leave the good ag land, and appreciate the Sarah maps and all the floodplains that we have. And then we can talk about what is it we can do to maintain it, because that's always going to be the issue. You can plan anything you want to plan, but who's going to be watching it once it's done? Once it's zoned and
Right.
you have the rules, who's going to watch that? And that's where I believe we have to come up with some very good rules in our ordinances that support what it is we want to do. And I think once we know what we want to do, and then we go back, and you're going to go back to the municipalities with this, right? And to the townships, and say, this is kind of the plan that they want. How does it look to you, and what is it going to do? And then we can get further into what you're talking about. But right tonight, I think we just need to listen to this and make some kind of a decision or some kind of discussion later, but we will get to it.
So,
Okay.
My words, lady.
so that, yeah, from a
Okay.
land use perspective, we want to make sure we're conserving ag, I think, as much as possible. That's been a drum beat by this group a lot.
it's just that I don't want anybody to forget
And
that.
and we are not, and I'm making another note, and I think I made it clear last time, we're gonna make sure Actions in the Land talks about hay production and kind of that local economy issue as well, so we'll get that note to them.
And moving your equipment around and so forth.
Yeah, and again, there's only almost so much we can do about people's personal behavior, but I mean, I think recognizing the importance of it, the economy, and talking about any, you know, I think it's part of the roadway discussion, you know, what areas need to have some improvements, but.
When we see Scott Hennings again, we can talk to him, because he's the highway department. What can they do? Because there's only a couple times during the year, and we've got so many young young people who don't understand how important those times are, either to get the crabs in or to get crabs out.
And on the egg importance issue, looking on this map, you'll see a lot of these kind of areas that aren't impacted by the Sarah overlay, these white globs. The reason there isn't a lot of orange in those areas is because they're highly productive egg land and they were purposely pulled out of consideration because of that. So we are trying to make sure, like, even from a starting point, we're not even considering some areas because of their egg production right now. So we're trying to recognize that in the land use planning right now too.
Michelle?
I just want to make a request that we stop making generalizations about different groups of people.
Yes, agreed.
I don't appreciate you assuming that it's young people who are driving recklessly around farm implements.
No, I'm not saying that they're driving recklessly about them, but they don't understand what that process is because we're more urbanized than we ever have been before.
And I disagree with you.
And I think there are a lot of different age groups that are doing the same thing. It's not just young people who are
Please
guilty of that.
understand that to me, somebody's young who's under 50.
It's
So
still a
when I'm
generalization.
talking about 25-year-olds,
Either way.
we can do age generation stuff all that you want.
I think we can all be better about not making generalized comments about
Won't make any
people
more.
or certain communities.
Agreed.
Ooh, thin skin. Go ahead.
Can I just have one comment to what, I think a common thread I was at the fair, and in here and at the fair is a deep love for the land here. And I know myself growing up in Kane County, there is a deep love in all of McHenry County for the land of all ages. And it gets in your blood kind of. But however, I think we can't hold time still, and it wouldn't be good. Like, for example, with, I understand, I'm not crazy about asphalt either, Pat, but we can't have no growth. We would be a dying county if we have no growth, particularly in areas where with transportation, like where I live in Huntley, in Marengo, we can't have no growth because we could die. But what we can do is try to keep that love of the earth and respect for the earth going, respect for these wonderful natural resources that we have here. So in my mind, it's a balance. Respect for the farmland, respect for the awesome natural lands, that we have to keep that in a balance, in my opinion.
And that's kind of where one of these plans is going, right? Where we have like a good starting point where it's more conservative and you said we can build from there. So I feel like it's good that we're going.
So with that said, scenario 2.
Transition for you.
So that data is the background, right? Kind of what we think could be potential areas to develop that's been a bit more constrained than our last conversation was, and then considering the Sarah overlay. So what we did was, again, basically said, all right, apply the municipal land use to any area in orange on that previous map. And then also, if it's within an overlay area, step down on how intense it is. So if it's a high density residential area, make it medium density. If it's medium density, make it low. If it's lower estate, make it egg. And that way we're avoiding kind of miscellaneous sporadic estate residential that this group has said is really not great for the county. It's not great for the watershed. And it really kind of goes against the idea of contiguous compact development that we talked about. So that process was used to create the map you guys have on page, the three kind of, I'll flip to it, sorry. Just want to make sure these tables are the same, as they are. So the last numbered page is on page 4, and so yeah, this would be page 9. And so that step-down approach yields this map, and really what we're looking at is about 61,000 acres of residential development. So that is not as aggressive as the first scenario, which was looking at about 74,000. So it's ratcheted down by about 15,000 acres. Still a lot of yellow, right, on this map. Still a lot of that lower density residential happening, especially around Marengo, especially around Huntley, and then pockets between Crystal Lake and Woodstock, and then up in the northeast area. So kind of the areas we talked about last time are still seeing a lot of that yellow happening. This pulled back version reduces overall impacts to ag land and accommodates quite a bit of growth. Again, if we're looking at CMAP as our benchmark, 27,000 households is what their numbers say. This accounts for 61, so more than double what's being projected as needed. So it's still pretty aggressive, even though it's been pulled back. This one, as we'll talk about in a few minutes here, it's pretty similar in ratio to what the 2010 plan was. It doesn't have quite as much commercial or industrial, but overall the residential mix is pretty similar to the previous plan. So it's worth noting that, you know, still aggressive, but pretty much in line with the previous effort. Again, this one pretty systematic, same map as before from business usual, but we deleted areas for consideration based on all those constraints, and then stepped down in intensity if it had the overlay applied to it. Any questions about that? And I have some comparison data, and we have a table at the end of this memo as well that helps kind of show how they all stack up. The third scenario, starting with scenario 2 as a starting point, we further constrain things to really look at just areas within a mile and a half. Again, that's a jurisdiction that the state of Illinois provides for planning for municipalities. And then after looking at that slightly more constrained effort, we further kind of revise things to basically say, all right, as we go around the county and look at different areas, what's the projection for growth in this area versus how much land we're seeing kind of for development. And so we wanted to allow for some expansion of municipalities, but also wanted to recognize that a lot of them have pretty good development potential within their current limits. Marengo being probably bar none in terms of how much area they've annexed but have not developed yet, right? Same thing, Huntley's got pretty extensive areas that have been annexed but not yet developed. Even Woodstock recently. So there's lots of areas that could accommodate growth that are within those gray boundaries on the map.
Has that been based on where they've stretched the utilities and the sewer?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, not all those areas have been annexed or served yet, but I think most of them are, or there's plans to. A lot of them are along highway corridors, right? So Woodstock has areas to the south that could be served.
And then did you take in consideration broadband?
Not this structure, no.
Okay.
Really, this is, I mean, we were just looking at kind of, I mean, they've grown where they've grown. It's historic at this point, so we're not expanding.
And then have you looked at other major players, for example, like somebody that has dragged the water utilities out there and having recapture fees that are associated with development?
So we are not, I guess we're looking at where existing plans are in place. We're not speculating about like a new development that's going to be doing that, and I don't think there's anything planned that would do that. I think.
Well, for example, like on Randall Road, that corporate center that's being built in Algonquin, they're going to have to haul the utilities out there, and they're going to have to haul the sewer and water out there. And then along the path, there's still some open space. Somebody's going to have to hook onto that sometime in the future.
Yeah. But again, those are areas that's annexed though. That's
Okay.
within their limits, so it's kind of gray box on this map. We can't really account for it. In looking at how to make changes to this scenario 3, we were looking at, all right, in this area, Algonquin's already annexed X, Y, and Z. Where do they, what makes sense for them to grow? We are in active conversations with some of these communities already because we're working with them, but others we're basing it based on kind of best practices and what we know. And that's why we want to make sure we include municipal engagement as the next round of kind of revisions to say, hey, we've taken our best guess that we think makes sense for the county and builds off of the trends we're seeing. Does this make sense for where your heads are at in terms of growth? Are you trying to be more aggressive in certain areas or are you not? I mean, so that's going to be part of what we need to do next,
Okay.
for sure.
Michelle?
Yeah, in the scenario 3, when you're stepping down in the Sarah map areas, are there some instances where it's just not enough to like step down once, and have you taken that into account? Like,
So, in scenario 2, in any areas that were low density residential and they were in a Sarah, they just became an ag. So they were stepped down kind of twice because we don't want to encourage estate residential in those areas necessarily.
and then is that the same in scenario 3?
Yeah, scenario 3, we kind of started with scenario 2, and then there's some areas, and I can go over that, but there's some areas where we basically said, you know what, we're going to leave it as it was planned, so we'll leave it as low density. And basically what that's communicating is that it's okay to develop here, but it just needs to be maybe in a different way, using conservation design practices. You could still build at 4 units per acre, but it's 8 units over here, nothing over here. So it's kind of thinking differently about how development gets laid out in design.
I guess I'm more concerned about like the commercial and industrial in those areas. Is that something that?
So there really weren't a lot of commercial industrial in Sarah areas, and that's kind of the piece we want to look at next. Once we, I think, have a good foundation for the residential. There's some areas that have red on this map that I think will end up being removed, and I think it might make sense to add red other areas. So maybe we talk through a couple of those spots right now, and we can get there. So yeah, there's, like I said, there's some areas where we did step things down and we kind of left as is. There's other areas where we made things a bit more intense, knowing that there's development potential there. And then there's other areas where we returned it to ag because the growth didn't seem necessary based on everything else that was happening. We can talk about the performance real quick, and then I've got several slides with kind of specific areas we can talk about. But overall, again, most conservative. We're basically right at the threshold for what CMS projecting is needed, 27,000 households and change. And this has the greatest amount of ag preservation, open space preservation. Collectively, if you were to add ag and open space acreage, you're only losing about 2%. So again, very conservative, really just looking at targeted pockets. And as we'll get to, I think where we've landed is, I think this is a good starting point. We can use this as a point, like kind of maybe make some refinements and then use this as a starting point for conversation with municipalities, and then just recognize that it's probably going to need to be more aggressive in select areas based on what we hear from you all, based on what we hear from municipalities. And we can maybe talk about some of those areas right now. So areas, an example where we intensified things. Woodstock in the kind of previous plan had a lot of growth to the north, like just north of us right now, like the kind of a medium residential and a commercial kind of node at St. Charles Road. What's the next intersection?
Charles Road.
Yeah, Charles Road. So that probably doesn't make sense in today's economy with where commercial's at. So we kind of reevaluated that growth area and said maybe we should pull back on part of that. They also had some growth happening more towards Bull Valley, where it was planned for estate residential. Estate residential doesn't really pay for itself, so I'm guessing Woodstock and where we're going with planning there might pull back growth there. We haven't confirmed any of that right now, but we're making some judgment calls about maybe we're going to pull things back and discuss, and then maybe where there's growth opportunity. So looking at the 47 corridor to the south, for example, there's quite a bit of contiguous land that isn't impacted by wetlands, isn't impacted by other constraints, and it might make sense long term to look at growth on the 47 corridor instead of maybe going east, for example. So just again, as a starting point to think about where we need to make some changes in land use.
Are you taking into consideration the new Metro train bed out to the west? That should, just the idea that there's going to be more Metro trains, and that's going to be an overnight bedding area, that there's a lot of growth that is anticipated in that area.
Could be.
Garrett, you could,
Sure.
that's what I've been told.
Yeah. Me
Or
too.
wherever, but that would seem to be a good place to start, because now Woodstock's going to become
Yeah, this-
another central place.
Yeah, I think this feels right.
It is?
Suggested, sure.
Okay,
And again, we purposely weren't having conversations with you about this because we want to have a group conversation, but obviously we're going to be talking to Woodstock about their land use framework
Right.
in their near future. But this is just kind of trying to take an
Okay.
educated.
as long as you talk
Yeah.
about it, I'm good.
Yeah, no, just really quickly, a lot of this is exactly what Perry's suggesting, where most of this that's been annexed was annexed back prior to the 2008 recession, doesn't have any utilities.
Right.
So nobody's developing it, you know. So it's there, it's in the city limits, but it's not, you know,
Right.
nobody's beating down the door to build there. So,
And the areas we looked at, kind of maybe reevaluating, again, the area to the north and the area to the west. The area to the west in Bull Valley, again, it's not served right now, it's unincorporated right now. It's next to other state residential. Is that really a growth area for Woodstock? These are conversations we have to have with Woodstock and with other municipalities.
and Mary, the area you're talking about is this nice purple right here that's industrial, and that's why
Yes.
they're putting a train yard there, is because it's already industrial.
Okay,
So,
So Woodstock's probably one of the few areas where we kind of did some swapping and said, all right, we're still gonna maintain overall growth, but we're gonna locate it maybe in some different locations that make more sense in terms of access, in terms of providing utilities in the future based on what we know. There's other areas where we're kind of doing the opposite, and Marengo would be that example where, and I'll get to that, maybe I can do that first. Marengo's not in here. This is the whole version. All right, I'll pull that up. Hey, so John, can you get that new Marengo slide for me? So this is an example where we've intensified things. And then kind of on the flip side of that, this is an area around Prairie Grove, Crystal Lake, where we've said, all right, you know, the Sarah is present here, and based on where everything else is, we think it makes sense to maybe retain that planned land use of residential. So it's contiguous, you know, it provides for compact growth that can be served. So let's maintain the residential there, but again, think about it as a conservation design approach perhaps. And so, unlike scenario 2, where we just automatically ramped everything down and was very systematic about it, this has been a kind of a customization where we're looking around at each of these pockets to figure out what made sense to maybe maintain some development potential. Again, knowing that we really pulled back using that 1.5 mile buffer, we still had to accommodate for additional growth. So we're looking at, all right, what's the projected population for Crystal Lake and for Cary in these areas, and what kind of acres do we need to add to make them kind of come in line with that projection?
well, back in the early 2000s, Nunde Township did have a plan commission that came up with a plan, and it included all the aquifers. Durs Anderson was part of that plan, to make sure that the areas in Nunde, which is partly Prairie Grove and Crystal Lake in that area, are they've got a good plan. You should check on that one with the township,
Okay.
because they already have one to tell you at least what the aquifers are and the high water tables.
Okay. So another example in Bull Valley, same thing, where we've retained that low density residential because it's surrounded by other low density residential. You know, it could still accommodate growth, be contiguous, but just think about it differently. And then southwest, there's a couple areas around Wonder Lake where we thought kind of the same thing could apply. Let's accommodate their growth, but promote that conservation design approach. So like this, for example, is the northwest corner. You can see all those properties, contiguous ag near Wonder Lake, adjacent incorporated areas that make sense from kind of a contiguous growth standpoint, but let's promote conservation design.
Please repeat your Bull Valley spiel.
Okay, Bull Valley spiel. This is an area that's surrounded by, so you can see on the map on the left, all that gray is incorporated areas.
Because you know Bull Valley isn't incorporated.
Right, but I mean, this is the area kind of adjacent to, so Bull Valley would be immediately to the south, I believe. So this is an area that's completely surrounded by other incorporated land, likely an infill target. It is within the Sarah overlay, but it's kind of isolated ag land. So it still makes sense, I think, from a development standpoint, rather than taking it offline because it's in the Sarah. Let's just talk about development being more of a conservation design approach.
Are you talking about that little square there?
Talking about this acreage here. So this is all a mix of incorporated and unincorporated that's basically prime for redevelopment because of its adjacency to these other developed areas. And it's not impacted by floodplain, it's not impacted by anything but the Sarah overlay.
Well, because I just brought up to you about the problem that we got yellow water and particulate in the water, and that's got to be looked at. That has been brought up to me by residents, and so I guess one of the things you got to keep in mind is where's the water going to come from for a lot of this? That is a problem we have here in Buchanan County.
Right. And I mean, that's why as you can see, we're being pretty conservative, in terms of outward growth. This scenario we're walking through only eats up about 2% of your ag and open space. So that's very conservative, especially compared to the 2010 plan, for example.
Ellie?
So,
I'm sorry,
yeah.
will you finish? Ellie?
So I may be misunderstanding, so I apologize if I am. So these ones that are being maintained as low-density residential because of their location, but you're gonna do it, or it's gonna be encouraged with conservation design, were any of these considered to be high-density residential instead to like compact more?
So, I mean, we could. I mean, I think
So it's
if we're
slightly-
going to do that, I think it probably needs to be areas that are more proximate to higher traffic corridors.
Right,
maybe
right.
Existing retail.
But like that was considered as well as besides just automatically doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were trying to be, I think, somewhat match the intensity of development
Okay.
adjacent to.
That makes sense.
We recognize there would be, some pushback if we really tried to like triple density in a
Right,
site that's
right,
next
in
to.
one area.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
these are kind of pocket examples. We didn't do a ton of adjustments, but we wanted to highlight areas where we really did look at it to accommodate that change.
Mhm.
And if that's, I think that's something we definitely look at in this next round, is kind of where those areas maybe we should be more aggressive. Sure.
Yeah, I would like that as well, like opportunities for more, density residential. What, for example, like in Bull Valley, do you know what that land is currently like zoned for?
So it's
Or it is
unincorporated.
currently
Yeah, so this pocket we're talking about is unincorporated, so, I would assume it's ag zoning until a PD is put forth and becomes a subdivision, or is annexed. We could look on the zoning map, and I could answer that, but I don't have that written down.
Do you know how many acres it is?
This one in particular, I don't offhand, but I could get that.
Because if it's less than 40, it can be incorporated within the incorporated area.
If it's
It
less
can
than.
be absorbed
Yeah, so I mean,
within Bull Valley, which is surrounding it. Once it's, I can't remember what the acreage is in the state of Illinois, if it's 40 acres or what, but you know what I'm talking about?
yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
think because it's surrounded, I don't know if, yeah, I mean.
Yeah, if it's surrounded, the incorporated area may bring it within the jurisdiction.
Yeah,
Right.
40, I think 40 sounds right.
Yeah,
For an
40 sound
involuntary
right?
annexation.
and this is probably in that ballpark based on like even what I've
Yep.
heard,
And the philosophy is that in areas like this that are already surrounded, that to use that land rather than
Right, so let's
stretching out
let's
into
focus
the
on
farm.
infill locations.
Right, it's supposed to
Right,
be
so,
better for less, using up less land.
Yeah,
Yes.
so this is farmland that's been segmented out. It's probably being farmed right now until they can sell. Yeah, I mean, that would be my guess in a context like this. It's an area that the acreage is, you don't have huge contiguous farmland anymore. It's been chopped up. The area to the south is state residential. The area to the east is floodplain. So it's really this kind of island that I would imagine is hard to maintain and make a profit on compared to other farms.
Well, this is not to say that would have to go to residential, it could stay as farm forever.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Whatever, just that it would be incorporated, it would be absorbed within the incorporated.
Yeah, I mean, anything we're talking about in this land use plan, I mean, we're talking about willing property owners, basically when they decide to sell and it be developed. This is the guidance that the county would provide. It's not saying they have to develop it.
Right.
So again, other areas we're making kind of a similar discussion. This is the area southwest of Wonder Lake, spoke to earlier. Again, pockets that are surrounded by other incorporated areas. This is kind of between Wonder Lake and Bow Valley. And then again, the same thing to the northwest side, northwest side of Wonder Lake. And then this is an area between Algonquin and Huntley, looking at a pocket of kind of development where we're also saying that should be maintained for development potential. So most of the areas we're making these judgment calls are areas that are contiguous or surrounded by, or mostly surrounded by existing annexed areas, and they make the kind of best case for infill development versus maybe similar SARA impacted sites that are on the other side of 47 for the most part.
But as a practical matter, most of the things we've shown will be developed within their municipalities, won't they?
Yeah, they would likely be annexed and then developed.
Yeah.
And as is most of the development we've been talking about in this plan, I mean, most of the areas we're targeting eventually would be annexed rather than encouraging. I think we've already, again, talked about not wanting to encourage additional estate residential in the county for the most part. I think industrial is probably the exception in terms of wanting to maybe think about new growth that might not be annexed. John, do you have that or not? Okay. The other area I wanted to talk about was the area south of Marengo. We can just go to the map. We can talk about that first. But again, Marengo has grown tremendously in the last decade or so. So they've got this whole leg of kind of 47 corridor that they've annexed to get to the new interchange.
23.
Oh, I'm
Not
sorry.
47.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Wrong town. That's okay.
Wrong
But it goes the same direction, I can understand getting it.
Yeah.
With the new 23 interchange direct.
Yes.
And so it makes a world of sense for them to want to get to that interchange from that kind of development standpoint. With that said, there's a ton of development potential in that gray area that hasn't been met yet.
Almost none of them
Right.
is developed
So
at this point.
as we're talking about need for growth, a lot of what Marengo is projected to absorb in terms of housing could be accommodated within those areas. And so this is an example where we really kind of pulled back. So for now, based in this scenario, the 23 corridor is really kind of returned to ag or open space, saying these areas really should develop first. And that, I think, is maybe a point of conversation with this group. I think realistically, the previous plan, the 2010 plan, calls for industrial along this area. There's room for growth at the interchange itself, which could likely be commercial. So I think this would be an area where we probably come back to it and say, you know what, even though Marengo's been aggressive, there's a couple spots where it probably still makes sense to talk about this being developed in the future. Just because they have an annex on the east side of 23 doesn't mean it's not prime development opportunity compared to the stuff that's farther to the north.
Transportation concerns eventually are going to control what you do there though too.
Transportation concerns?
Transportation concerns eventually are gonna determine what you're gonna do around Rango too. I live not too far from Rango, I live about as far west as you can in the county. And depending what you do, or depending where the roads go, I don't wanna go out a lot of time on this, but transportation and getting traffic moved around, that's gonna become the biggest issue out there, as far as where you lay out of the south. Because the traffic's getting horrible out there, to be honest with you. Now you add some more industrial, which I think makes perfect sense to go to the south, but it's gonna become a huge factor, even determining where you go. Because at some point, you're almost gonna have to bypass around Rango if you get a lot of truck traffic coming.
Or widen it a lot like they've done with 47, like they've done with Rainbow, right?
But there's a lot of houses on 20 when you go, or
Yes.
what, you mean on 20, right?
Or on
20?
Yeah, 20 and 23
Yeah.
are going through.
A lot of red, older homes and
Yeah.
it's tight.
So,
Sorry.
where we've really,
TJ?
sorry.
I just have a question. Have you been to any of the Marengo like planning meetings recently? Are they expecting a large residential impact from the new Metro stop or no?
You know, I have not been, you know, I live in the country, so I'm not part of, not in Rango itself, so no, I haven't been to those meetings, but a few of my customers that have land around there, I mean, they've heard there's been proposals to run a bypass around the west side of Rango, but the problem is how do they cross the river and bring it back? But, you know, there's been talk of that.
Well, I know like myself, it's very expensive to live in Cary. My husband and I, now that there's going to be a train going to the city, we've talked about possibly moving to Marengo where the homes are cheaper, you get more land, and there's still access to downtown. So I can't imagine there's not
I mean,
other people thinking that.
There has been talk of actually running a rail line from Belvedere out to Rango.
Yeah, it's been approved.
But it's Huntley. It's Huntley, but Huntley is close to.
But there's a stop in Marengo.
No, I don't believe so. I believe it's Huntley because it's Amtrak.
Yeah, the new train would be
Huntley,
just,
Belvedere,
Oh, is it just
Rockford,
Hartley? Okay.
I believe.
I thought they said they had plans for a Marengo stop.
there were, I don't know if, maybe that's a longer term.
Well, the 2010 map has it.
Whether it's Amtrak,
Right.
gonna operate it or Amtrak.
I heard it was
And if it's Amtrak, I think it's a whole
Amtrak.
different animal.
It's Amtrak.
The one through Huntley will be Metro.
Metro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
not
But
Amtrak?
it'll be 2 trains a day.
Right.
Yeah,
Like-
but it'll be Amtrak. And yes, the 2010 plan had a station in Marengo because in 2008 or 9, it was in the RTA's plans to eventually extend service and have a station there. So House Levine actually did the stationary plan for that in 2009. It's been a long time. So, and I think, you know, it's still a future potential station, right? Is that the phrase I think?
Right off the top of my head.
Future potential station, I think is always the phrase that we're told to use.
So do you know, is Marengo thinking that they're going to increase their like single-family homes? Because they're building all new single-family
So-
homes right there.
Yeah, I mean, they still have everything on the map for you guys. So like this pocket, you know, along the 20 corridor immediately west. So they've got kind of this, they've snaked in over here, but I mean, this pocket has always been high profile. I mean, because of TOD, the stationary plant flagged it as well. But if you look at their previous plan, it really is aggressive. This whole area is flagged for residential. And what we've done is basically say, you know what, we agree you should be looking at these areas immediately adjacent, but, you know, does this area make sense when you've got all this other potential? And so this, again, this has to be a conversation with Rango to say, you know, is this still your plan to kind of fill out all this in the next 10 years? Or can we talk about, you know, where it makes sense to focus investment?
Did you take the Duke Power facility into consideration in this?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, because I think you've got some of that is part of Duke Power's.
The solar,
Oh, solar
right?
farm?
The solar,
Yeah.
the Duke.
It's the 3,000 acres.
Yeah, when did, we got the shape file with the parcels, right? Did we get that? or anything.
Yeah, that solar would run from.
Did we get that there?
90 to
Right.
20.
So only within the last couple weeks have we gotten a layer that has all of the parcels associated with
Okay.
different farms, so we weren't able to fold that into this. But it's definitely something we will do, because
Yeah.
it needs to be taken off out of consideration.
Right.
And you saying that that's in this area here?
Yeah, it would go from 90 clear up to 20.
It actually
Yeah.
goes across 90 in a couple of spots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if that impacts where we're showing growth.
Yeah, the only one would be that orange on the west side of
Okay.
Marengo.
So
And maybe a little bit of that down by 90, because
So that'll be an update, I mean, we'll do across the board. I mean, we only got that, again, recently, so we weren't able to pull that in time for this. But I think for the most part, those are happening in areas where we weren't talking about significant growth, so I imagine the impact would be pretty limited.
probably.
But definitely something we want to make sure we get right. And we talked about commercial earlier, and I want to bring this up. So, again, if you look at the Marengo plan, again, it's old. Marengo plan from a decade ago, they had all of this as residential, especially down in here. And so this commercial node is flanked by townhomes and single-family housing, basically. So I think as part of our revisions, we're going to be taking a tighter look at some of the commercial that's being proposed in these areas to say, you know, if we're not including commercial or residential over here, does this still make sense? And this would be an example of kind of a loop road that, you know, right now, I think it has a small commercial property on it. It doesn't make sense unless you have additional rooftops that kind of support, or the traffic, which this area, the traffic counts, I don't think would be substantial enough without the development happening. So, again, I think if we can work with, you all work with the municipal and township planners to think about the residential and really pin that down, we can then find some of the commercial. So, this is the summary table that kind of pairs all of them together, and then looking at page 13 and 14 is kind of where this is located. But again, looking at overall impact to open space and ag, if you were to add that acreage together, just compared to existing land use, scenario 1 is the most aggressive at that loss of about 17%. Scenario 2 is about 9%, and then scenario 3 is 2% loss. So very conservative in scenario 3. Scenario 2 is a bit more similar to what the 2010 plan included. So again, I think we're going to think about maybe a good starting point. I don't know, our thought is, well, let me talk about first areas. So residential uses in the 2010 plan were about 50% of the county, and then 16% in scenario 2. So those are very similar in terms of residential capacity. I think where we're short in the industrial and the commercial, which I think we want to get to, but we didn't think it was appropriate to speculate yet. And then in terms of, I guess, how we want to use this moving forward, I think if we start with scenario 3, make some modifications, be a bit more generous in some areas. I think, you know, mixed use, industrial, sounds like maybe promoting some higher density residential in select areas would make sense. And then coordinate with municipalities and townships really to identify their priorities. You know, I think ideally we have something that maybe isn't quite as aggressive as scenario 2 or similar, but it's a bit more focused. Still provides a good regional framework, but is a bit more realistic with how municipalities are prioritizing their growth. I think that's what we think makes sense and has been a good next step, and I guess using this as a starting point. But I'd be curious, I mean, does this group agree with that sentiment? I mean, are there any red flags you're seeing? Again, municipal engagement need to be being a next priority for us.
In looking at the estate residential outside of the urban areas, did you take into consideration big chunks of lots that are already approved?
So those have been filled in basically in this scenario. So
You haven't pulled any of those out?
Right, we've kind of, it's like, all right, if it's platted, we're going to assume it eventually will be developed as proposed. So that's been another assumption that was made.
I have a question with the Sarah overlay. So the Sarah overlay, which is the recharge areas, right? Protecting the water, we're protecting the water in the recharge areas. So that's more predominant, right, in scenario 2. That's taken more into account, correct, in scenario 2?
Well, I mean, so scenario 2 is kind of writ large. If development's within the Sarah overlay, we're gonna decrease density or eliminate depending on how dense it is. So again, the lower density residential and estate residential were basically zeroed out and made ag. And then the medium and high density were brought down a notch, so it became medium and low. We started with that for scenario 3 as well, but then there were some areas where, because we were also restricting and looking at only a mile and a half out, we weren't accounting for enough growth, I think, to really be realistic. So we basically, excuse me, looked at some opportunities where we could maybe leave that low density residential in place or leave the medium density residential in place, understanding that it would just need to be designed differently. So scenario 3 still accounts for the Sarah overlay, but in a few select areas, we made a judgment call to leave the density.
So it
in place.
respects this in general, it
I mean,
respects
yeah.
the Sarah map.
Yeah, I mean,
Too.
for the most part, and then where we left it, if it's within the Sarah overlay, it's never been meant to say you can't develop there. It just means you have to develop a certain way.
Okay.
And so scenario 2 basically says, all right, you're gonna ratchet down, recognizing basically if you develop a certain way, you're coming down in density across the board. And we made some select modifications to that. But still, that Sarah overlay is not going away. So,
Okay.
yeah.
I'd like to know a little bit more about like scenario 3 with the low density residential, medium density, and high density residential. It seems like there's way more low density, less medium, same amount of high. I'm just wondering, is that because of the Sarah overlay?
For the most part, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we need, I think that's an example where, you know, if you guys really want to see some additional, more of that townhome type of development,
Yeah.
then we need to kind of look at where those areas were impacted. The good news is we wouldn't eat up more land, but we would increase the number of households being provided, so that would improve kind of the performance of the scenario.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd definitely like to see if there are opportunities for that.
But I think it's gonna be hard to have that kind of density without utilities available.
Yeah.
Right, which is why I think when we're making these kind of decisions, we need to look at contiguity and proximity to those existing annexed areas. At this scale, we have to make some assumptions that basically if it's incorporated, it can or could be served more readily. I think all we can do is really avoid the leapfrog development piece of it.
Well, I mean, you can't make that assumption in Bull Valley or Spring Grove, neither of whom have utilities serving residential.
But they can't develop beyond a certain density without service, correct?
Oh, yeah, that's correct, but
Yeah.
well, what I'm saying is they do not have water and sewer, and I don't think plan on having water and sewer beyond. Spring Grove has a little bit of sewer and a little bit of water for its commercial corridor, but will not serve residential even if they ask for it.
And so, yeah, are there other places in the map that could support that we can find?
So yeah, I mean, we can look at if there's any pockets where we've talked about the growth that would exceed that density. But I don't know if, because I think looking at Spring Grove for the most part, it is a whole commercial. Same with Bull Valley, there's just that one area, I think.
I mean, like that Algonquin piece, the Hunley, you know, like those little areas in there could probably support that.
Municipalities really are the only logical place for any kind of high density. Existing municipalities, because they're the ones that already have water and sewer.
Right, which is why if we look at any medium or high density in this map, it should be, I think, adjacent to those existing boundaries. But basically saying, hey, this might be a good candidate for higher density development, it's a good candidate for annexation.
If you wanted to have that,
Right.
if you wanted to go with that. But it wouldn't have to be within an existing municipality. It's the only thing that makes any logical sense, other than, well, because otherwise, we don't have any water. And there's also, as Charlie pointed out, there's no plan in most of these areas to have water and sewer. And there won't be either.
Because that would be a great expense to move one in the middle of nowhere to move.
Yes, it would be unbelievable,
Right.
so
Right, correct.
it's not gonna
So-
happen. Yeah.
So this is why I'm cautiously optimistic that the conversations with municipalities is going to go well, because we can say, hey, we're accommodating some growth, but it's not as aggressive as it was 10 years ago. Does this make sense for you? I mean, municipal clients we have for the most part, do want to focus on new opportunities and getting more bang for their buck out of existing annex properties. They don't want to get into a state residential development because it can't pay for itself. There's a lot of alignment, I think, between wanting to promote compact development and conservation. They complement one another, so.
Also, the commercial, you have to watch very carefully because those are closing left and right. All of the mom and pops, plus, don't forget, you have large numbers of like Walgreens and Walmarts and Kohl's and all of them are closing as well. And so commercial is not something that you want to hang your whole hat on either.
Right, which is why I think, again, we want to kind of right size, I think, the commercial footprint of this plan based on where the residential is happening. So it's meant to be kind of providing a service to those rooftops. And, with the exception of some of the growth that could happen on maybe 47 or 23, where there's the traffic and can bring in regional visitors. For the most part, we want this to be kind of local serving commercial development that's in this plan.
I just want to quickly disagree with the mom and pop's assumption that downtown Woodstock, downtown Crystal Lake, downtown McHenry are approaching 100% capacity on occupancy right now.
Yeah, fair point.
They're all very
Yeah.
full. Very, very few spaces left.
And that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
That's the way it should be. And that way that they're fully utilized and don't have to worry so much about closing down or anything like that. But boy, oh boy, there are plenty of areas where their downtowns are just closed like crazy
Right.
because of the situation
Right now,
after
the trend in McHenry County is going very well with small
After.
businesses.
COVID. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That is true. But we still do have places, like the old abandoned campus up there for, whatchamacallit, by Harvard. It's,
Not abandoned.
It's not,
what do you,
no, it's not empty. Not anymore.
No, it's occupied.
Charlie can tell you all about it,
Motorola is
but
occupied.
It's occupied. It's
Well,
not
can we
abandoned.
just
anymore.
it's not abandoned. Well, I'm glad to
It's
hear that.
occupied.
Hey, I'm glad to hear that.
We're still not sure
Something
what exactly
moved
they
in.
do there, right? But they claim to make gloves.
It's super duper secret, right, Charlie? But it's
First they had to move out all the bats and
yeah.
eagles and everything that had moved in and.
No, but there's activity up there now.
Wow.
And so that's an example where maybe we do want to think about some additional growth by Harvard because of this facility now being occupied, but do we want to be too aggressive on that? So that's an area where, another area we want to look at, I think.
Yeah, actually, Harvard, in addition to that, has had 2 or 3 quite substantial industrial developments over the last several years.
Wow. And he's helped, I think, with the Motorola.
That's it.
So with that said, I mean, the only other slide I had, just to, again, kind of discuss the next steps. We want to use tonight's discussion, with municipal and township partners to refine this land use scenario and really make it a land use plan. Again, I think getting the honest input from municipal planners to help right size this a bit. Again, I think we're being conservative in this scenario 3, knowing that we can go back a little bit the other way and end up in a good spot. Using 2010 plan as a benchmark for maybe the more aggressive we can be, but try to keep it within reason. And then working on the countywide plans now as well. So we are, the sub-consultants are working on that revised framework you all put together for us, and we're starting to flesh out those plan chapters. I think our goal again is trying to get end of year, have a draft plan that then you guys can take a look at, and we can have adoption in the spring.
When do you expect that we'll be able to see the key recommendations edits?
The revised document. I was hoping it would be for today, but
Okay.
Our subs have been I know KLA is having conversations with Scott Hennings now about some of his comments. I think we're a little bit behind in clarifying some of the direction we got. So
Okay.
we're hopeful to have it today. I'm sorry you don't, but we can get it to Renee to get to you guys not too long.
Okay.
There's a couple pieces. Like historic preservation was an area where I want to have some more conversation about maybe over slicing up that chapter a little bit, because it got broken up into a lot of smaller pieces, and I wonder if that makes sense from a chapter flow. So I think part of this is going to be, as we develop the chapter, you will all see kind of what this means if we follow your direction versus maybe thinking things a little bit differently, knowing that the content's still there, but it's organized slightly differently. So part of this is going to have to be kind of seeing how it comes together in an actual chapter as well. But yeah, we'll get the revised Word document.
Yeah, I'll just want some time with it to be able to really read through it again and make sure that everything that, we talked about is included or not, so.
That's my spiel. Again, CMAP forecast, 2010 land use plan, those kind of benchmarks that we can use to gauge the performance of these scenarios. I think we're hopeful we can get to a good spot with you guys that balances everything. Questions or concerns?
Historic crossroads. There's that one section that we've talked about in preserving those historic crossroads. And that might be someplace where, and this is just out and about, where you can have some commercial or some, not industrial certainly, but some agritourism and things to increase the ability, what am I trying to say? As people come through, there are places like you want to stop and look at a plaque, or you want to get a cup of coffee, or you want to get something else because you're on a trail, and it involves all of that. So that historic crossroads part is going to be, I think, something that we can look at as an advantage to increasing traffic in areas that are very unused at the moment, and nobody knows what's there.
That's a great idea.
That you can promote that as part of the, what is it now, that's real Woodstock. Naturally McHenry
Yes.
County. So that there's more places that people want to go than just to Union to see the Thomas, the train.
Tank engines.
There you go.
Thomas the Tank Engine.
My kids were already grown up by that time.
So,
I
Mary,
really
a
don't know.
quick discussion point on that, I guess, is are we comfortable with the idea of encouraging conversion of older historic homes into commercial at those crossroads? Because ultimately, if we're going to grow commercial, that's going to be the first thing that's going to happen is those homes are going to convert. Very much like the Anderson's chocolate in Richmond, it's in an old house.
Yeah.
Right? It's going to be stuff like that
Geneva,
in the
Illinois.
existing buildings. So just
Well,
to
look at the
fill
stage
out the
style.
real question, is that something we're comfortable with? Is that kind of residential conversion into commercial? Because otherwise,
Don't
it's just
people
one
who
question
live
about how
there want to
comfortable we are with
change
that
it
kind
into
of goal.
something else? I
Yeah,
mean,
that's been a topic in downtown Woodstock, is as we try to grow a little bit,
Sure.
there's a threat of losing some of those historic homes. So,
And losing them or converting them is not seen as losing them, is it?
in our case, we're
Yeah.
talking about redevelopment of the whole block or something
Okay.
like
Oh,
that,
okay.
you know, which is probably less likely in Alden, but, you know, it could be.
Well, I'm thinking a little bit further north, like in Wilmot, where you have
Yeah.
the stage stop is an old stage stop, and they have the upstairs all converted into what it was like to be in the 1850s or 1860s, and unless they've changed it. And they have extraordinary food downstairs.
Right.
And-
Not anymore.
Huh? No?
They were closed, they weren't paying their taxes.
Oh, no. That's Vermont, that's Wisconsin.
Yes, that's true.
Okay, so it's Wisconsin, so I don't care. No. Nobody lives in Wisconsin. I'm sorry, Michelle?
I know we had talked about including the historic crossroads in some of
Right.
these maps. Does scenario 3 consider that with some of the land uses or not yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
So we were really focused on the residential piece.
Okay.
Right.
And, yeah, I think the crossroad, those nodes are mapped. It's something that obviously we had for historic preservation, and we can look at from a commercial standpoint. I think we'll need to think about, what areas we think could actually sustain that. If it's in the middle of the county and not near a high traffic corridor, does it make sense to try to push commercial when it's gonna be very seasonal, low intensity?
Sure.
Or, is it just maybe select areas that we wanna really push for that piece?
Well, it's to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's our next steps? What's our next step?
So we're gonna work on refining this and then really creating a preferred land use plan. At the same time, we're starting to develop the actual policy chapters, so that key rec memo that you guys reviewed and restructured, we're revising that. We'll get you the revised memo, I'm sorry it wasn't available today. And we're starting to create chapter content around that revised memo. Next steps, we'd like to use an October meeting to basically work through any questions, areas of concern we have as a consultant group with you guys. Say, hey, for housing, a couple things we really want to talk about with you guys for this section. For agriculture, here's a couple topics. And so I guess depending on how that meeting goes, maybe it needs a stretch into November, I don't know, but we want to kind of make sure that as we're creating this content, you guys aren't in the dark, then we can make sure we're interpreting and having a conversation with you guys. And then that'll give us the direction we need to kind of finalize that chapter and basically have the content of the draft.
So do you want us to tell you whether we're looking at scenario 2, more or less, or scenario 3 with parts of scenario 2?
But, I guess what I've been saying is, I think it makes sense to start with scenario 3 and add to it.
Okay.
And I've been seeing a lot of head nods, so I think that's,
Yeah.
that was kind of
Okay.
confirming direction there.
Yeah.
Again, so,
We concur, I assume. Is
Yes.
anybody against that at all?
No.
I think that's the way to go as well.
yeah, we know it's pretty conservative, so there will be more, hopefully not more of the light yellows, but a bit more of the darker yellows and oranges in terms of residential. Changes the way I think where maybe some of the commercial is located, some additional purple, industrial on this map. But again, I think this is a good start.
And in case anybody is interested, Vern, there's your Sarah maps that we're talking about.
Sarah maps are also the kind of orange blocky map. The hatch is the Sarah there as well. So.
Do we know if we're gonna have a September meeting?
We still have to talk about that. We can have, it would make sense to do because there are some other issues that we need to look at. And if nothing else, it would be presentations so that we are better informed, particularly in areas that have some conflicts when you get into discussions. One person says this, the other person says, no, it's not. We have to find a third person in there who isn't personally involved. And I'm talking about solar farms.
Oh,
So we have more information. There's a
Okay.
lot of information out there, but it depends on who you are and what you read. So I want to make sure that we get all the information we can, that, because we're still back to, you can have something that says, okay, solar's gonna be this way, and we're gonna do this with it, and we're gonna do this with it. And then it's up to Renee to go slugging through these areas to see if it's being taken care of, and then what can you do with it? If they don't want to, they're not going to, and then we have another bugaboo, and where do we go after that? If it's not that way, and if it's, just, like I said, there's too much information out there that you can cherry pick, and I want to get an overall so that we are involved with that. And the other one, I want Shaylin Bagel to come if she can and give us a report on the Council of Mayors and or Council of Governments and what they do, to include in that.
I would like to also hear from McHenry County Economic Development, if possible.
That too. That's all part of it. Economic development.
I didn't hear.
The EDC. The ex officios that haven't been coming to these all the time and are not as involved as the people who are already working for McHenry County in their own positions. So it's a matter of getting hold of those people and seeing who they are, or finding out who they are. I don't know who to go to for solar. I know who is really a proponent, and I know people who are absolutely against it, but I want somebody who can give us a really straight on, down the middle, this is what it is, this is true, this may be true,
Good luck.
this is not true. I'm sorry?
Good luck.
Wasn't
not gonna get it.
there, wasn't a consultant on your team that had a lot of information about solar?
Solar farms, is that in the agricultural? It's a farm.
I think we discussed moving it from consideration, but, we do have, members on the team that know about kind of, especially the impacts on ag. So Solutions in the Land specializes in the farmland preservation planning, so they have a decent amount of knowledge on solar farms and their impacts. Geosyntec, the infrastructure, engineering firm, so they've definitely got some background there as well. But
So would that fit what you're looking for? Or?
I'm just looking for a reasonable explanation of what's actually going on, because there's so many layers, from the state doing what they've done to the county doing what they wanted to do for a while, and now they got to do something else. And what's the actual procedures that are going to be happening when, where, if it does? Just because all of these places, Renee, you can help me with this one, just because there have been approvals or permits or applications approved does not end the process. There's still a whole bunch that has to be done. So that, if I'm not, tell me if I'm incorrect, so that so many of these people who have done this as a predecessor to being able to do something, they bought it, they said it, okay, we're gonna do it, now they have to fill out all the paperwork, they have to do all the things, they have to find out in their SARA. There's things that the county has to look at to see still with this limited responsibility as we have of what we can do. So it's quite possible that you have 23 applications and they're all approved, but they're not all going to go in.
Well, most of them aren't going to go in.
There you go, thank you. Thank you.
They aren't economically viable unless they are granted the incentive packages by the state. And there's a process for that. It's done once a year. And if they get the incentives, then they're going to build it. If they don't get the incentives, they're not. And so far, something on the order, the ones we approved in 2019 and 2020, roughly 1/4 of those have been built.
Okay.
Some of those may still be built, but 3/4 have not.
Okay.
We don't know, I don't think, and Renee, correct me if I'm wrong, of the bunch we've done this year, what percentage will be built, but I would presume probably on the same order, right? Is that sort of your view?
So, and I think that's what Mary's getting at, is that solar for us in McHenry County right now is a real hot button land use issue. Because we have, as a county, approved 40 some odd projects, I believe.
I think it's maybe even in the 50s.
It could be now. The state of Illinois changed the rules on us. There's a lot of history there. So it's something we've also passed on to House Levine. They've put together a map now of all of these projects, their boundaries, so you can kind of see the potential impact. But like Charlie said, very few of these things are actually going to get built unless something changes drastically overnight. Very few of them. I think we have 5 up and running right now of those 40 some odd, and we have 2 or 3 permits in right now. So it's a very low percentage, but it is, some people do see it as a threat to agriculture in that it can have impacts like raising the price of farmland, because these solar farm companies can afford to pay higher rents than tenant farmers can, and that sort of thing. So it is a big land use issue, and I think that's what Mary's getting at, is that we need to get some more background on that. Solar farms not as an environmental issue as much as the agricultural impact. Inform ourselves, solutions in the land, we'll touch on that, I'm sure, in their chapter as well. But the more information you guys have been going into reviewing solutions in the lands, we're better off, we all are. So I think that's where you're going.
That
correct,
is exactly
Mary?
where I was
Okay.
going.
And I want to talk about the date of the September meeting.
What is the fourth
The
Thursday?
4th Thursday is the 28th, and I get confused whether we want to do the 3rd or the 4th, so.
I thought we kind of went to the fourth
The
instead of the
4th, okay.
third.
So that's September 28th, and from what I've heard now is you guys would like for Shaylin to give a presentation about what she does as the
Right.
Council of Governments and
And let's go with-
Economic Development, and what they do.
McConaughey or Schober is
Okay.
good.
And
Jane's
then-
sort of retired.
I'm sorry?
Jane is sort of retired.
Really?
Yeah.
Sort of? Ever? Really?
And then I can
Okay.
put together some solar information, or we can get someone from the solar industry, whatever you guys want to do. But I want to kind of keep it more on not the technical aspects of the solar farm, but the potential impacts on land use.
Sounds good.
Renee,
Okay, yes.
do you know anything, or I found
Oh,
that presentation by the last solar guy that came before us on ethanol versus solar in terms of electricity generated per acre. Very interesting. I was wondering if we knew whether it was true or not.
I don't know, I can find out though.
Okay, because if that's true, that really is quite dramatic. What this gentleman said is that a third of our corn crop goes to ethanol in Illinois. But that if, and the ethanol is used to fuel vehicles primarily. If instead you go to electric vehicles and use solar, the solar, in terms of vehicle miles traveled at current technology, an acre of corn will move a F-150 17,000 mi, and an acre of solar will move an F-150 540,000 mi. And therefore, over time, using the land for solar will free up, will increase the amount of agricultural land for food dramatically. Now, that sounds wonderful. I just don't know if he's true.
I have heard that the ethanol isn't very efficient.
Well,
I heard that.
ethanol will cease to be important if electric vehicles become the main thing. and it'll be how we generate electricity.
And don't they use a lot of water to produce?
They use a
ethanol?
tremendous amount of water.
Right.
But they never were environmentally all that friendly, but they're great for the farmers, the row crop farmers, because it strengthens the market for corn. But I think that it doesn't have a great future, but this alternative argument I thought was really interesting, and I don't know whether it's true or not.
But there's a lot of information out there right now with the rise in solar and land use consequences, and so that's certainly something we can put together.
Thank you.
There's misinformation out there too.
Oh, yes.
Oh, sure.
And then the October 26th meeting will be with Halcyon Levine again.
Right.
Okay.
Good to know. And in the meantime, we'll be working with, staff will be working with Halcyon Levine to set up the meetings with the municipalities and the townships again. Correct?
Yeah.
I'd like to make one comment about, well, if that's all right. So Mary, those of you that didn't go to the fair, Mary did an outstanding job.
Yes.
Oh, just, yeah.
Of organizing it, and it was very cool and very hands-on. It wasn't like boring, and I think all the people that stopped there really and participated really liked that, with the, putting the chickpeas in the jars, and it was just very clear kind of what we're all about. So I wanted to thank you very much. And one additional thing is, there was a little overlap. I was blessed to be there also with Ellie, and who was so great at the booth and enthusiastic. And this is to me, this one couple was quintessential McHenry County. I don't, the couple with the woodchuck, with the timber doodle. So there was a couple, there was this couple, probably about my age, I'm not sure. But did they have 40 acres or 20 in Bull Valley?
Something like that.
Something, either 20 or 40 acres in Bull Valley, and just in love with their land. And they get these timber doodles. The woman showed us they're American woodchucks. Woodcocks. Beautiful, like cute little bird, and then a nocturnal. And what do you remember? And they were just so in love with their land, and these that would come out at night, and to me that's quintessential McHenry County, with their having this sporty, this whatever amount of land, and just loving it and cherishing that those birds were on there, and that it was worth sitting at the fair just to meet that couple.
I think we learned a lot from the people that we talked to.
Yeah, people were not hesitant to share their opinion, which was good. It was good to hear a lot of the feedback from people.
It was entertaining, if nothing else.
At points, yes.
If you have any notes or photos, please share.
Renee, the cards, the index cards, did you give that?
I haven't yet. I will do that. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's fine. There were a couple suggestions, and I have them for you. The one that Randy can tell you about with me was very interesting conversation with the lady who wanted to make sure that our American flag was held in great esteem in Woodstock Square. And she had almost the plans for it, and so it's dedicated. Not anything we can do anything about, but it was but that was a lot of people,
We nodded and
because
said that's a very good idea.
nobody knew what they were coming into when they came into it. That's why they looked at the sign and said, wow, and then they see this thing, and then they see that thing, and there's all kinds of stuff that they can look at and do, and we covered pretty much happy people. And the ones who weren't happy, pretty much.
We sent them to the ice cream place. No.
That's right. Either that, or we sent them to the next building to see the pupae for the chrysalis for the butterflies.
Yeah.
And then to get the kids involved in more things, I think that was more it than anything else. You are the future, Mom and Dad, they are the future. So what is it you want this all to look like? And when we go to the county board, we can bring them all the information that says we are not bereft of outreach. It ain't going by and handing them something.
But you can't go out the aisle.
But you can't go out and that.
You can't hawk them in. I mean, that's
No,
the problem.
no.
That's a stupid rule, by the way.
Well, it got out of hand. I think the reason that it's the way it is now is because of COVID. They have to have wider aisles, and they found that an easier way to work with things. And so, especially with the carriages for kids now, they're like little carts.
RVs.
Yeah, almost.
They need a license.
Just about. And if you get one going each way, somebody who's in a scooter and handicapped is going to have a real hard time. So they get, at least our booth was set up for it. We may have lost some people on the way that there wasn't that much room in the booth, let's put it that way.
That's true.
But we did a fine job with what we had. Thank you very much. My mother thanks you, my father thanks you, I thank you. I couldn't have done it without you guys. Absolutely couldn't have done it without you.
It's amazingly well.
Well, kind of.
Yeah.
It's kind of neat too. It's an adventure. We'll have to do it again next time.
All right.
And we still have 10 minutes left. Is there anything anybody wants to add about anything?
I make a motion for adjournment.
Okay, motion by Randy and